Welcome to my finance channel. This video might be long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand the true nature of the dollar system. Have you ever wondered how one nation prints green paper to exchange for the real physical wealth of the entire world? Why does humanity continue to blindly trust a financial architecture that has already violently broken its core promises once before? Chapter 1. The Illusion of Gold Stability. Let us begin by examining the fundamental concept of monetary certainty. In the year 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in the quiet town of Bretton Woods. They constructed a global financial architecture designed to last for decades. The United States held over 70% of the global gold reserves because war-torn European nations had traded their precious metals for American military supplies. This massive accumulation of wealth allowed the American government to confidently peg its currency to gold at $35 per ounce. Every other major global currency was subsequently pegged directly to the dollar. The world believed they were holding paper that represented genuine, tangible value. Human beings inherently crave certainty, and shiny metal hidden deep within secure vaults provided the ultimate psychological comfort for a traumatized post-war world. However, no illusion can survive the relentless pressure of human greed and unchecked imperial ambition. The fatal flaw of this system was that it demanded absolute restraint from the sovereign power controlling the printing press. When a hegemon possesses the unprecedented ability to create infinite wealth out of thin air, the psychological temptation to overspend always overwhelms the rational desire for long-term financial stability and sovereign discipline. The ultimate tragedy of history is that human nature inevitably corrupts even the most perfectly designed financial systems. Chapter 2. The Nixon Shock and Collapse of Monetary Logic. By the late 1960s, the financial gravity of the Vietnam War began swallowing the American Treasury like a massive black hole. The direct military expenditures cost almost $30 billion in 1968 alone. Meanwhile, the Great Society domestic programs dramatically expanded welfare spending, forcing the government to massively accelerate the printing of paper money beyond its real capacity. French President Charles de Gaulle was among the first global leaders to recognize this massive institutional deception. He deployed military ships and aircraft to transport French dollar reserves directly to New York, demanding physical gold in return. Other European nations quickly followed this defiant example, creating a sovereign-level bank run that panicked the American financial establishment. The vaults were rapidly emptying as reality finally collided with the endless printing press. On the evening of August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television to unilaterally sever the sacred connection between the dollar and gold. He completely closed the gold window without consulting any international allies or trading partners. This moment fundamentally altered the course of human history by transforming a gold-backed currency into a purely fiat instrument, operating entirely on blind faith and speculative confidence. This betrayal shifted global economics from a creditor logic demanding fiscal responsibility to a debtor logic encouraging endless consumption. Developing nations suddenly realized that the wealth they had traded their sweat and resources to acquire was now subject to the arbitrary whims of American politicians. The psychological shock severed the fundamental trust between nations, proving that a vulnerable hegemon will always prioritize its own survival over any sacred international treaty. When a hegemon rewrites the universal rules to save itself, the rest of the world simply becomes disposable collateral damage. Chapter 3. The birth of the Petro-Dollar system. Stripped of its physical anchor, the American currency faced a terrifying existential crisis characterized by rampant domestic inflation. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War triggered a devastating oil embargo that sent global energy prices quadrupling almost overnight. Long lines formed at empty gas stations, revealing the extreme vulnerability of the Western industrial machine to Middle Eastern geopolitical dynamics. American strategists realized they needed a new universal anchor significantly more powerful than gold. In July 1974, Treasury Secretary William Simon traveled to Jeddah with a highly classified mission. He offered Saudi King Faisal absolute military protection and advanced weapons systems in exchange for one crucial sovereign concession. Saudi Arabia must price all its oil exports exclusively in dollars and invest the surplus profits into American Treasury bonds. This secret pact bound the global currency directly to the indispensable blood of modern industrial civilization. The agreement ensured that every single nation requiring energy must now continuously accumulate dollars simply to ensure their own survival. A masterpiece of financial engineering transformed an impending imperial collapse into an unprecedented global monopoly. The desert sands concealed a monetary mechanism that would govern the world for the next half-century. The heaviest chains are always forged from the basic necessities of human survival rather than cold iron. Chapter 4. The hidden machine of global wealth extraction. The Petro-Dollar system created an invisible wealth extraction engine never before seen in human history. Whenever a manufacturing nation produces cars or electronics, they must export these real assets to America in exchange for printed paper. They then use this specific paper to purchase Middle Eastern oil, keeping their domestic factories and agricultural machinery running smoothly without disruption. The oil-producing nations inherit massive piles of paper wealth, which they cannot possibly spend domestically without destroying their own currencies. Following the script, written in 1974, they recycle these billions back into the American financial system by purchasing government bonds. This perpetual recycling mechanism drastically lowers American borrowing costs and effortlessly finances their tremendous trade deficits and massive military expenditures across the globe. This dynamic reveals the bitter tragedy of trading nations trapped within a system designed by a financial empire. Hardworking populations across the globe sweat in factories to earn the exact currency the hegemon prints at essentially zero cost. This collectivized fear of systemic collapse forces every subordinate nation to actively protect and uphold the very currency that silently drains their own sovereign wealth and future prosperity. True absolute power lies in making the victim willingly maintain the silent instrument of their own economic subjugation. Chapter 5. The Three Pillars of Dollar Power. The foundation of this empire rests upon three indestructible pillars designed to trap every participant within a complex web. The first pillar is the pricing mechanism dominating global commodities, ensuring that essential resources like oil remain forever bound to the American ledger. When nations trade energy, they subconsciously submit to the pricing authority of a foreign sovereign entity hovering above their daily transactions. The second pillar is the unique ability to issue enormous debt exclusively denominated in the domestic currency. Over 80% of American long-term and short-term sovereign debt is priced in dollars. Unlike developing nations that collapse when foreign capital flees, the hegemon simply prints more currency to fulfill its obligations, entirely erasing the existential currency mismatch risk that routinely destroys smaller emerging economies during financial crises. The third pillar is the terrifying reach of the global financial sanctions apparatus. The SWIFT messaging network and the CHIPS clearing system monitor approximately 50% of all global cross-border dollar transactions. These electronic systems function as a panopticon, allowing Washington to instantly erase any disobedient nation from the global financial architecture with unprecedented precision. Isolation from this digital network equals immediate economic death for a modern state. If you control the invisible flow of global capital, you command the very beating heart of the entire world. Chapter 6. The Price of Defiance. The hegemon cannot tolerate any direct challenge to its core operational mechanisms. In the year 2000, Saddam Hussein made a fatal miscalculation by announcing that Iraqi oil exports would transact exclusively in euros instead of dollars. He actively converted $10 billion of national reserves into the European currency, threatening to tear a massive hole in the global pricing structure maintained by Washington. In March 2003, American military forces crossed the ocean to dismantle his regime under the pretext of weapons of mass destruction. Within weeks of the government falling, Iraqi oil was swiftly reverted to traditional dollar settlement. The global financial community instantly understood the brutal underlying message that pricing energy outside the authorized paradigm would invite immediate sovereign destruction and total regime change without hesitation. A similar gruesome fate awaited Muammar Gaddafi when he proposed the gold dinar concept in 2011. He envisioned an independent African currency backed by over 143 tons of Libyan gold-to-trade resources without Western interference. Following thousands of NATO airstrikes, his administration was eradicated, and the golden dream evaporated into the desert dust along with his ambitious vision for sovereign financial independence. The military machine will always violently deploy to protect the vulnerable underbelly of the omnipotent paper currency. Chapter 7. Internal cracks in the system. Every great architecture eventually crumbles under the immense weight of its own arrogance and internal decay. The United States now faces a horrifying mountain of sovereign debt exceeding $39 trillion. In the year 2024, the interest payments required simply to service this astronomical borrowing surpassed the entire American defense budget for the very first time in history. Furthermore, the increasing weaponization of the currency has begun to generate severe systemic backlash among global observers. In 2022, Western coalitions suddenly froze approximately $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. This unprecedented confiscation sent shockwaves through every global ministry of finance, instantly destroying the fundamental trust that underpins the entire reserve currency model built so carefully over past decades. When you utilize a global utility as a geopolitical weapon, you inadvertently teach the world that your carries lethal political risk. Foreign investors and central banks observe these aggressive actions and quietly decide to reduce their exposure to American assets to ensure their own survival. The share of dollars held in global reserves has slowly declined as sovereign nations desperately seek alternative financial architectures to guarantee their ultimate security. A weapon used too frequently without restraint eventually forces the terrified enemy to invent a much stronger shield. Chapter 8: External Challenges and Global Shifts. As internal confidence wavers, powerful external challengers are systematically dismantling the structural monopoly. The American shale revolution dramatically transformed the hegemon from the ultimate customer of Middle Eastern oil into its fiercest direct competitor. This fundamental identity shift fractured the original 1974 bargain, leaving the Saudi royal family deeply questioning the reliability of their primary military guarantor in a changing world. Concurrently, the rise of the Eastern Hemisphere presents an intimidating alternative economic gravity. In 2018, the Shanghai International Energy Exchange successfully launched yuan-denominated crude oil futures contracts. Despite initial Western skepticism, it rapidly evolved into the third-largest crude benchmark globally. Sovereign producers now have the direct option to exchange their energy resources for Chinese currency, which can be seamlessly converted into physical gold in Shanghai. The technological infrastructure of trade is also evolving rapidly beyond Western oversight and traditional banking control. The multilateral central bank digital currency bridge, known as Bridge, connects multiple nations through direct peer-to-peer transactions. Saudi Arabia has officially joined this network, allowing immediate cross-border settlements that entirely bypass the traditional dollar clearing corridors like SWIFT. The invisible chains of financial dependency are quietly dissolving within the encrypted digital realm. True systemic liberation does not occur on a bloody battlefield, but deep within the silent code of alternative clearing systems. Chapter 9: The Fragility of Trust. Throughout this silent war for financial supremacy, the ancient auditor of human greed patiently watches from the deep shadows. Gold continues to serve as the ultimate barometer for global confidence in fragile paper promises. Following the sanctions of 2022, global central banks drastically accelerated their accumulation of precious metals, purchasing over 1,000 tons annually in a historic shift of capital. This massive migration of sovereign capital represents a profound vote of no confidence in the current monetary paradigm. Central banks are not carelessly speculating for profit. They are actively purchasing essential insurance against the inevitable dilution of the hegemonic dollar. As the debt expands and the printing presses accelerate, nations quietly fortify their own vaults, recognizing that true sovereign independence cannot rest blindly upon the debt instruments issued by a strategic competitor. Simultaneously, the broad technological landscape is shifting the very definition of global power from traditional carbon to advanced silicon. While oil once dictated the economic rhythms of the world, the future unquestionably belongs to renewable energy infrastructure and massive computational processing power. The hegemon recognizes this shift and desperately attempts to maintain global dominance by monopolizing microchips, hoping to seamlessly transition its currency from a petro standard to a compute standard. Humanity always desperately seeks to replace the fading gods that can no longer effectively control the turbulent heavens. Chapter 10: The Future of a System Without Anchor. The imminent collapse of the petro-dollar paradigm will not resemble a sudden explosive demolition, but rather a slow and agonizing hemorrhage of structural influence. For half a century, the developing world has faithfully absorbed excess American inflation like a massive financial sponge, dutifully exchanging tangible commodities for abstract currency. But as this coerced participation gradually diminishes, a terrifying economic reckoning approaches incredibly fast. If nations no longer need to hoard green paper to secure their daily energy supplies, the artificial demand underpinning the massive sovereign debt market will rapidly evaporate. The trillions of dollars wandering the globe may inevitably return home, triggering a destructive wave of structural inflation that absolutely no central bank maneuvering can ever contain. We are currently witnessing the extremely painful transition from unipolar dominance toward a complex, fragmented, multipolar reality. As conscious individuals navigating this historic transformation, we must immediately abandon the comforting illusion of perpetual macroeconomic stability. The financial rules written in the midst of the 20th century are rapidly becoming obsolete relics of a slowly forgotten empire. If this immersive exploration into the hidden machinery of global wealth has enriched your deep understanding, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. We will continuously analyze the invisible forces shaping our complex world. When the illusory paper finally burns away, what tangible reality will you actually be left holding in your own two hands?